morning. My name's Chris Cann. I'm Head of Mining Journal Intelligence, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all here to Mining Journal Select 2019. The Mining Journal Select concept was born in 2017 when we were looking to review options for a new events business. That process allowed us to take a step back from the schedule of investor gatherings and assess what was being done well, what was being done badly, and then what was completely missing. During that assessment process, it became crystal clear that, barring a couple of notable exceptions in Colorado each year, the industry investor event circuit lacked integrity. There's nothing necessarily wrong with having a bunch of companies who are paying to present to an unqualified investor audience, but then there's nothing necessarily right about it either. At a time when investor confidence in the mining sector is at rock bottom and development capital is scarce, despite the need for a development pipeline to service an increasing population, Aspermont's view was that the model should be completely reshaped. Therefore, the fundamental difference between Mining Journal Select and most other investor events is it's not an open invitation. The value is in its exclusivity. Year-round, investors are faced with the ridiculous challenge of reviewing some 2,200 listed equities across three main mining exchanges to pick the winners. And while we don't recommend any individual equity in itself, the core value of our service is we discard the chaff to leave investors with only equities and assets worthy of further consideration. How we do that is central to the value of the conference, and we'll get to that in a moment. The second differentiator is we provide guidance for company executives on their presentations so they fit with what investors actually want. Presentations are kept short enough to discourage executives from going off-piste, but they're long enough to properly cover the key points. The focuses are the headlining asset numbers, the specific investment opportunity, and then the risks and the mitigation of those risks. The third point isn't necessarily unique to Mining Journal Select, but it's important for the equities presenting. We filter our investor audience to focus on individuals and institutions capable of providing genuine assistance in financing a development. The Mining Journal Select concept immediately resonated with investor audiences when it was launched last year, and we presented 18 assets to around 150 largely institutional investors. After the conference, we were inundated with requests for access to our database of asset reviews, which we would have gladly made available, but at that point it wasn't a formalised database of numbers and facts, but more scribblings and notes in large quantities. So the editorial team had spent about 9 months going through about 750 assets with help from the Association of Mining Analysts to come up with a final list of assets they were happy to approach as presenters. But that process was informal, incredibly time-consuming, and from my perspective it was too subjective. So when the job of formalising the selection process was passed to the research team, there were two primary objectives. First, streamline the process so we could actually repeat this year on year, and then second, remove the subjectivity. So while we've adhered tightly to the concept developed by the editorial guys and supported by the investor community, we've made several adjustments to ensure the longevity, objectivity and transparency of the database. So you've seen this everywhere when you've come in already. But these are the companies presenting over the next 2 days that have come through on the right side of 50 in our ratings formula. So the database we've been building presents data most relevant for investors and encourages like-for-like comparisons. That is, what we're aiming to do is present only data that is fundamental to investment decision-making in a transparent and consistent way, which allows you to hold up two equities or projects against each other and compare apples with apples and oranges with oranges. So the numbers we include in our database start with the basics like project name, location, commodity, listing, and they go through to the key asset numbers, economics and costings. And while we consider all the metrics presented relevant, we only use a selection of these in various combinations for our rating system. The ratings cover three primary investor-sensitive categories that make up 75% of the project scores. They are the economics, the jurisdiction, and the confidence. And then there are 3 more subsidiary categories that are viewed as important but have to a large part been absorbed in the primary categories. And we look at financeability, the geology and the metallurgy. So this is what it looks like. The economic score is weighted heavily at 40% and is viewed as the best description of a development asset's total opportunity. And from that point of view, we'd suggest that most of the other factors investors need to consider essentially act as discounts to that underlying value proposition. We measure project economics with 3 metrics: the MPV, the IRR, and then the ratio of MPV to the initial capital needed to be spent to build the project. Jurisdiction is fairly self-explanatory. Some places are regarded as mining safe havens where it's a bit easy to do things, and others are approached by only those with a fairly high risk tolerance. We incorporate jurisdiction scores directly from our investment risk index, which is part of our World Risk Report, and the jurisdiction is rated at 20% in our overall asset ratings. The confidence category, we try and look at how reasonable the inputs being used in the economic or feasibility study are in generating those headline economics. So this is weighted at 15%. And our view is that investors should have more confidence in numbers that are based on conservative commodity estimates with high discount rates that come from publications that are more mature, so a pre-feasibility or scoping study isn't weighted as heavily as having a bankable or definitive feasibility study. Something that's published this year should be weighted more heavily than something that was published 5 or 6 years ago. The first of the subsidiary categories is financeability with a 10% weighting, and we look at the ratio of market capitalisation to the initial capital spend as an indicator of the equity raising capacity. And then we also look at the operating margin, which gives a level of comfort or otherwise on the security of development capital in a lower commodity price environment. So the final 2 categories are geology and then the engineering/metallurgy, and both of these are weighted at 7.5%. The geology looks at the size of the measured and indicated resource for an indication of the overall scale of the project, while the grade provides a sense of the overall quality. Relevant engineering metrics are limited in most early stage studies, which means that we can't be consistent across assets that we're presenting if they're at different maturities, so scoping versus a full bankable feasibility study. So all we do is we look at whether the processing technology that's being proposed is proven and off the shelf, or whether it requires a technology leap of faith, whether it's unproven technology for the processing. So conspicuous by its absence is a consideration of the management team. We would completely acknowledge this is perhaps the most important thing that investors will consider ahead of a decision. But assessing management teams, except in the most black and white cases, is far too subjective in our view, and so best left to the individual investors. So that's what it looks like for now anyway, and it's underscored this year's event, which is bigger than last year's, with 29 companies and sponsors and 350 investors registered to attend. So our aim is to expand the database to include 300 assets by next year, and as we refine the process, we're also looking to include exploration stage projects and also producing assets as well. So the idea is to make these databases accessible through the Mining Journal Premium subscription. There are also copies of our pipeline handbook that are floating around the conference as well. They've got all the methodology in there and a snapshot of some of the assets that we've covered. Premium subscribers also get access to other databases we're building around finance, METS, leadership, and the risk numbers mentioned earlier. And just to warn you, we've also launched our World Risk Report survey in the last couple of weeks, so you'll probably get harassed by somebody in the research team over the next couple of days to fill that in for us. So apologies in advance for that. Thank you very much and enjoy the conference.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're already running a little bit late, so I'm going to absolutely rattle through this so that we can catch up. My name is Andrew Monk from VSA Capital. I'll be chairing today along with my colleague Ollie O'Donnell, who is also around here. unfortunately, we've got quite a lot of work going on in the office, so I can't spend the whole day here. We've heard the introduction there from Aspermont. I mean, I think they put on a fantastic conference here with a lot of quality companies, a lot of quality investors, et cetera, et cetera. We know there's a lot of conferences all around the world, always taking place, so I think this is an exception that it's a really, really good one. So thank you all for coming along. There's a lot to get through today. As I say, we're already running late, so I'm literally rattling through this, but you're going to hear all sorts of things, geopolitical, different commodities, EVs, alternative financing, you name it. Everything's going on, and of course you've got one-to-ones upstairs. And if you haven't got anything organised or you want to meet people, then just make sure you talk to the organisers, and I know they'll do it. A few housekeeping points very, very quickly. All the breaks will be held upstairs in the main ballrooms upstairs. The Wi-Fi code, if you need it, is Minexia_NR, because there's no wireless reception down here, but do keep your mobiles on silent. There will be no Q&As after the mining company presentations, because there's a strict 15 minutes and we're trying to get back onto schedule. Please do stick to your 15 minutes if you're a company presenting. A couple of reasons why you've got to do that is, one, that either myself or Ollie will kick you off. Number two, the mic's going to go quiet. But actually, probably more important than that, if you can't tell your story in 15 minutes, then frankly, you've probably got a bad story. So make sure you get it done. And if people have got questions on the presentations, go and do the one-on-ones upstairs and find the company elsewhere. So you can always get your questions in. After the main sort of keynotes and panels, there will be time for questions. There'll be a roving mic. Please use the roving mic. And do, when you ask the question, say who you are so that people know who you're talking with. There isn't an app for this event. However, there is an on-site concierge service who can assist you, and there's lots of people wandering around. So if you've got any questions, please do go and ask the Aspermont staff. Tonight, Aspermont, who are obviously hosting this conference, will be hosting a drinks reception from 6 o'clock onwards. So make sure you stick around for that and have another opportunity to talk to all the companies and your peers. It's great to see everybody here today. As I say, I've rattled through this very, very quickly. So I think now, just to catch up on time, I'm going to invite E.B. Tucker to the stage for the first panel and presentation. Thank you.
Good morning. The topic this morning that we'll discuss should be of high degree of importance to all of you. It's really your money and how much of it you'll have several years from now. This morning, gold is over $1,400 per ounce. It's a decisive breakout in US dollars, in loonies, Aussie dollars, across every currency across the board, it's breaking out. And you look at this, the companies you'll be hearing from today. I know all of these companies. We've covered them in some of the newsletters that I write. We've met the management teams. Any one of them on their own is worth consideration, but there's something about these companies that what I'm going to talk about should be layered on top of any meeting that you sit through, because the bull market that's about to break out is going to be very big, but it's not going to be like the bull markets of the past. And the reason why is because the world is quite a bit different today going forward than most of us in here. I'm talking 40 years back. So if you're experiencing a bull market more than 40 years ago, maybe you'd be able to disagree with me. But what I'm going to share with you, the research that we've done is critical to deciding where you put your money. And it's not about the deposit that's in the ground, and it's not about the management team. It's about something that's much more important that no one is talking about. So first, let me kind of qualify myself as to why this is something that you might want to consider. I write a newsletter for Doug Casey. Some of you have heard of Doug Casey, but there's kind of a backstory as to how I ended up with Doug Casey. And 20 years ago, I was working in low-level finance. I kept being hired in a sales capacity because I was somewhat of an average level of charisma. And I had too many ideas. So the problem was always the guys I worked for said, you have too many ideas. Can you just shut up? And can you just go sell the thing that we want you to sell? We don't want to hear about what you think is going to happen in the world. And so obviously I got to a point where I said, this isn't going to work for me anymore. And I'd been trading my own account for a few years, and I'd made sizable bets against Fannie Mae and Countrywide. I had a guy that I was trading with. We agreed to make the same trades, do the same research with our accounts, and we just got creamed shorting Fannie Mae and Countrywide. We lost a lot of money. This is in 2006, specifically the summer of 2006. We had done a lot of these things you see now in The Big Short. You know, we had gone and talked to these low-level people in the U.S. that had bought 7 condominiums and all these things. And we lost money. We couldn't figure out why these Fannie Mae was $50 and Countrywide was $80. We didn't understand. So anyway, long story short, this market did collapse, and what I did is I'd done all this work, so I liquidated my entire balance sheet. I took half of it and bought single-family homes in the U.S. as cheap as $10 a square foot. I think you measure them by meters here, so we'll have to do a bit of a conversion, but $10 a square foot is about 1/15 the price you could rebuild a home. So if that gives you some idea of how cheap they are, and I still have those homes today, and I detest real estate. I bought them because I felt like we were going into a period where people would be renters, okay? And I'm telling you this for a reason. It's not to get off the topic of resources. The other half of the money I put into resource stocks because I had been in the gold market for about 6 years at that point, and I felt like I had an edge with picking early stage gold and silver producers, and these stocks did quite well. Long story short, I started a fund with another guy, and we closed that in 2013. I went to work for Doug Casey, effectively, and other newsletter guys. And what happened was I had a blog where I'd written all these things I'm telling you. And I tell you all these things so that you can see. It's very important when you listen to someone to know what they've done, okay? So they're not just telling you something. I want you to see that there's a pattern of thinking that's very important when you listen to someone. And it's a pattern of thinking with me that is non-linear, okay? Almost every single person that you'll meet in high finance, I've met guys that sit on Fed committees. It's shocking. When you meet these guys, you're beyond unimpressed, okay? I've met the highest guys. They don't know how to think, all right? They think in a linear fashion. What that means is they take what just happened and they extrapolate that out in the future because they feel comfortable about what they just saw and they figure that'll just keep happening forever. That's a way to get your head chopped off, okay? Especially with the things that we have going on now. This is a completely different world that we're entering. And so the basis of what I'm telling you today, you have to understand how I think, because all these things I was explaining that I did over the last 20 years, they were completely nonlinear. They were taking things that were outside of people's purview and saying, what just happened isn't going to happen again. It's going to be different. All that to get to the point of how do we pick the right companies to be in at this conference and make the most of it. This is what's going to happen in the world going forward. 1972, President Nixon landed in China. Could have been a publicity stunt because he had other problems, who knows. But it ushered in 40 years of walls coming down, okay, in the world. All kinds of walls. Concrete walls, barbed wire walls, trade walls. I mean, you've heard of some deals like NAFTA. You haven't heard of all these other deals. You know, this Northern African trade deals. You look up history of trade deals. There's so many deals you've never even heard of. 40 years of accessibility in the economy. It's beyond just trade. It's the internet. Look at all these things that came during that period, that 40-year period. That period is finished, okay? It's over. It didn't end yesterday. It ended 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, we could argue about the date, but maybe Trans-Pacific falling apart was the time when it really ended, but it's finished. And it's not coming back, okay? And what I want you to see today, what we see and what we've done a ton of work on, and I haven't seen anywhere else, is that what you're going into now, I mean, if someone had told you in 1972 that we were going to go into a period of walls coming down, you could have traded that. You could have traded that and you could have made a fortune. A lot of guys did trade that. I mean, Soros traded that. All these major guys that you are familiar with, they traded that. They stuck with one big trend, okay? If you can find one big trend, you stick with that trend, you can make more money than you can possibly spend in a life. In fact, your great-grandchildren will be spoiled brats because you'll have enough money that you'll effectively ruin their life trying to give it all away and do something with it, okay? So you have to find this big trend. And the world is now trending. It's being compressed into zones. I want you to think about looking at the world. And for 40 years, we were looking at the world opening. This was a world that was opening in every different way. Now we're going into a period where it's being compressed into zones. And that's important because if one of the companies that you buy is in the wrong zone, you're going to have an impossible time making money. It doesn't matter how rich the deposit is. It doesn't matter how great the management team is or the financing going into it or anything. it's in the wrong zone, and the world is going to fracture into these zones. So what is this going to look like? Well, let's look at a few things that's already happening that you can already see these zones. Last year, I went to the DARPA conference. DARPA is the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects Laboratory. Why would I go to this conference? Well, I was studying GPS, and GPS is fractured into zones. I'm not sure if you know this, but the U.S. launched the first GPS system. There's 30-odd satellites, and this was a service to the world. So the U.S. was saying, we can use location data so that ships aren't running into each other, all these things. And we'll give access to these satellites to anyone in the world. Well, recently, Russia launched a system that can shoot a missile from space to knock GPS satellites out of orbit. Well, why does this matter? It's more evidence that you're fracturing. Russia has the GLONASS system. It's 30 GPS satellites, completely separate from the U.S. system. India has 8 satellites in their own GPS system for the subcontinent. China has 30 GPS satellites. You see how now, instead of having something that was opening, we had a technology that everyone could use, everyone in the world could benefit. Now we're changing that. We're closing down into zones. We have zones with visas now. There's places in the world that, as an American, I used to be able to go. Now there's threats that I won't be able to go there. I'll have to have a special visa to go there. And there's the trade zones that you're familiar with. So if you look at the world, you can start seeing these zones. And who's playing these zones? What are the important zones? Well, if you look, the Chinese are playing this in a very different way. I mean, I've been to Belarus, all over Eastern Europe, very poor countries, and you see all these Chinese people. What are they doing there? Well, they're building power plants, they're building railroads, they're building ports, they're building stadiums, they're building all these things. Howard French wrote a great book called China's Second Continent about how China was sending 50 million unwanted adults, mostly male, and prisoners included, over to Africa, encouraging them to interbreed and to be part of the community there, and to have palm oil plantations, and to position themselves with dry cleaning stores and coin laundries and grocery stores around key parts of town. Why are they doing this? Well, China's attempting to play Africa in a different way than you're attempting to play Africa, okay? Most of the people in this room, I'm looking out at a bunch of people that seem to be Westerners, and they think about things in a very different way, okay? You're going down and looking for an asset to buy equity in this asset. The Chinese are going in and saying, we're not going to waste our time and money with that. We're going to go about it a different way. I think they're going to be more successful. And what the Chinese realize and don't want to tangle with is that Africa's #1 export is going to be people over the next 10 years. You have this flood of people leaving, okay? So mining investments in Africa need to consider, what zone is Africa going to be in? And is that going to be a zone that I can have influence over with my money? And if the answer is no, then you have to really consider this, regardless of the economics of the project. What zone is India going to be in? India's $1 billion plus. India will be, I think, the largest, most populated nation in the world. Going forward, look 10 years ahead. And what about India? Well, India is very important. So India is an ally with the U.S., but as you see right now, they're taking the S-400 missile defense system, and we have a problem with that. Why do we have a problem with that? Well, it can shoot down the F-35, and it can, more importantly, it can decipher the F-35's stealth capabilities and all these different things, okay? This sounds like it's off the topic of what we're talking. It's not. It's very important, because remember, we're getting into zones with defense. Who can shoot what down? Who can do what? The Russians are quite a bit more capable than people realize, and it's very interesting to say, if you have this world where you have zones for defense as well, what does that look like? Am I going to be able to invest somewhere where I don't have influence from the country that's my zone? If I'm outside of my zone, will I be able to invest? I say no. And you have to think really hard about that, because you look back over the last 40 years, it wasn't a consideration. Capital markets were opening. You go to Brazil 25 years ago, everything was being privatized. Things were being opened. Corruption going down, access going up. The ability to go down and to take a mining claim or a royalty claim and to attach yourself to it and to secure payment for yourself was being enhanced. Now it's going the other way. In Mexico, Monex, there's a big scandal now where I was reading about this morning, where Monex, a lot of accounts just vanished. There were 5 or 6 pesos left in the accounts. And people say, well, what are we going to do? We can't do anything about it, okay? Mexico's important to the United States. Let's look at that for a minute, because the question is, what will the United States zone look like? And I think the UK will be aligned with the United States in a zone, and I'll explain why later. But in the U.S., if you look at what happened with NAFTA, okay, so once we opened NAFTA, foreign direct investment in Mexico has gone up 750%. It's a shocking number, because you're talking basically about going from peasant status up to something that's, I think, fairly impressive. I was just in Mexico City. I really enjoy visiting Mexico City. It's a sophisticated place, and there's 0 Americans. I mean, you could be there for a week, you won't see 1 American. And I find that very interesting, because sometimes my complaint is there's too many Americans that I'm running into. They haven't been anywhere, and they don't know very much, and they watch a lot of television, so it's very difficult sometimes to talk to them. Okay, so Mexico now is a serious economy, but what happens is Mexico now exports, 35 to 40% of their GDP to the United States. Okay, so when you look at the headlines of what just happened with Trump, this matters for resource investors. Why? Because Mexico produces roughly a quarter of the silver in the world every year. That's a huge number. And they basically elected a communist. Now, what's the implication going to be? We'll talk about Trump in a second, but look at what just happened with this deal. I wouldn't be surprised if AMLO then starts to fight back with more concessions on silver and gold production. I mean, what's the difference to him? Attaching another government royalty to these things? This might be a good way to fight back. What else is he going to do? He has to go along with what Trump wants, because he can't lose 35% plus of his economy, of his export economy. He can't lose that. Okay? So is Mexico going to be under the U.S. zone? Probably. Is Latin America going to be under the U.S. zone? Well, let's look at it. Personally, I think there's something to the fact that Ecuador gave up Assange. I mean, I don't know if it could be a local subject here that people have different opinions on, but I find it strange that after all these years, you would then give the guy up instantly. Some of the mining companies that I'm close with in Ecuador say that there are interesting things going on, that kind of things have perked up from the U.S. perspective. I think there's something to that. Is the U.S. trying to secure the northern crest of South America for exactly the reasons I'm talking about? I think yes. What's happening in Venezuela? It's a proxy battle between Russia and the U.S. It's a proxy battle. No one really cares about Venezuela. It's a resource-rich place. It's not really that much different from Colombia or from countries that are around it, but it's a battleground right now for East versus West. And who's going to win? Maybe the U.S. can win that. China's building hydropower capability in Argentina. So you can start seeing in the continent, everybody is positioning. Everybody is trying to figure out what they're going to do. And you should be doing this too, because you have access, if you're based in London, you really have access to the U.S. zone. Think about, a lot of these things tie back to intelligence. Think about Five Eyes. That's probably your U.S. zone. You've got Aussie, New Zealand, Canada, U.S., UK. This is probably going to be your zone. And I think you can make the most money and, more importantly, lose the least amount of money. Because let's be honest, it doesn't matter if you pick the right deposit in the ground in a far-flung place. If you lose the investment, if it's seized, and you say, well, that's probably not going to happen. Well, people said that in Tanzania. And look what happened. It got very complicated very fast. And effectively, you made a donation to the ruling party. And then the ruling party could change like that, and you have to make another donation, because these people don't give warranties, by the way. I'm not sure if you follow how they work, but when the new guy comes in with a bigger tank, it's time to come back to the table to deal again, because the other guy flew to Zurich with all the money that you gave him. Okay, so this is the real world, all right? You have to consider this as a mining investor. So let's go back to the U.S. zone. I want to talk about Trump for a minute. In 2016, I went to every political rally. I went to a Trump rally, a Hillary rally, and a Bernie rally. I wrote about this. I went in print, and I predicted that Trump would win the election. It's not just something I'm saying. You can read about this. Doug put a bet on this. He made 5 times his money because no one thought that Trump would win. I thought that Trump would win because I actually experienced what was happening on the ground in all of these places. I don't vote. I don't have a television. I don't pay attention to major media outside of Bloomberg and reading and all these things. I'm not at all interested in consuming kind of regular news, which most Americans are news junkies. And if you know anything about the news, which I'm sure you do, it's a propaganda machine. So to consume that, you cloud your vision and distract yourself. Donald Trump will win in 2020, assuming that someone doesn't kill him. I mean, he could have an unfortunate heart attack or something like that. I mean, I think that there was some, I think he realizes that, by the way. I mean, you saw a year ago, there were all these stories about his diet being so poor. It was almost a setup to say, well, he had a heart attack. I don't know what happened. There's been 5 U.S. presidents, 4 killed, 1 almost killed. I don't know if people know that, but that's about 11 or 12% of the U.S. presidents have either been assassinated or almost assassinated. You don't think of that, but it's a serious statistic. I mean, in Latin America, they send them to jail when they're done. In the U.S., they just kill them. So, I mean, think about it. Okay, so I'm convinced that Trump will win. Well, how do you understand Donald Trump? Well, one good way to understand Donald Trump is to realize that he did 15 full seasons of The Apprentice. It was, I think, 197 episodes. It amounts to making 96 full-length motion pictures. And if you spend any time on camera, I mean, I've spent a decent amount of time on camera for random interviews and all these things. It's a little bit stressful. I mean, you have to kind of get up and go and you're just on. And if you did 96 full-length movies, I think you would be so comfortable under the camera that you could kind of go all your waking hours with the camera on, and you could manipulate the appearance that you had in any way you like. Does that sound familiar? I mean, this is exactly what's happening, okay? And then what you'll notice if you study Trump, if you study The Apprentice, and Scott Adams did a lot of writing about Trump. If you haven't read Scott Adams' work, the cartoonist, I mean, he did an amazing write-up on Trump's personality, and it's the most accurate thing I've read about him. You should read that, because what you'll see is that Trump is the perfect guy to run the U.S. as we're headed into a system of zones, because Trump is a guy that deals with every single person individually. Okay, this is exactly what we're talking about with going into zones. It's you're going to get a different deal, and you're going to get a different deal, and everybody's going to get a different deal. And you strike a deal, and he's going to keep his word on the deal, but everybody's going to get a different deal. It's not going to be one deal for everyone or one deal for Latin America. It's going to be one deal for Guatemala and one deal for Honduras, and then you're going to go like this around the whole world. And this is going to push the world further into these zones. Okay, and so I think if you start investigating all these setups that we're talking about, what you'll see is that this is definitively where we're headed. And to leave this out of your investment calculation is a huge mistake, because what will happen is you're going to wake up down the road and you're going to say, I thought I did my best thinking. I thought I considered all these things. I met the management team. I read the research. I did all this stuff, and I got really hit sideways in a place like a Tanzania type situation. And how could I have seen this coming? Very easily, if you considered that the influence that your zone or your country may have is waning, okay? Or if it's consolidating into a certain part of the world that maybe you haven't spent a lot of time looking at. And if you can see that you're losing influence over a particular area, you might want to abandon these investments entirely. And so when you start looking at these things, and I'm gonna shift to tell you what I've done about this with my own money, okay, which I think you'll find very enlightening. But when you start looking at these things, I mean, take one more example, is look at Russia. I mean, Russia, the stocks are opposite of the U.S. They trade with double-digit dividends and single-digit PEs. You know, there's a reason for this, right? Because the influence that the West has is it's non-existent. Okay, so we've been working on this for maybe 2 years now. You know, it took a long time for us to figure out what this is, and we think we figured it out. So I've made the largest investment of my life, the largest single investment of my life into a company that I think is positioned to not only survive this, but to also absolutely thrive. And for instance, we have an asset in Tanzania. We've had no disruption of payment, because we're collecting a royalty in Tanzania, and we're doing that on the back of the company that lost 15% of its ownership, when the government came in and decided what it would take. Okay, so I'm a big believer in the model of royalties, and you all know how they work. Okay, so there's a percentage of production in the mine. I think it's the closest thing to having a tax that you could possibly have in life. I was always fascinated by the stories, the Warren Buffett stories of Buffett said if he could own one thing, it would be a toll bridge, because there's no other way you can get across to the island where you have your beach house unless you pay his toll. And I thought, well, this is great, and this is kind of like tax. I mean, if you could control a county, you had a system like this sort of here at one point, but control the county and you can collect revenue from everyone's productive activity in the county. To me, that's a business that's unrivaled. Okay, so, and I'll tell you this, and then we'll kind of wrap up. I couldn't find a royalty company that met my standard, so I created one. It's been 30 months ago. We have a 60% compounded average growth rate since going public. It's called Metalla Royalty and Streaming. The ticker is MTA in Canada. It's MTAFF in the U.S. I'm a director of the company. I've bought a lot of stock, what I consider to be a lot of stock. I bought stock Friday. I bought stock the week before. I've continued to buy stock. And you can track that since I'm an insider. You have to see that. And the reason why this bet will win as the world compresses into zones is because you have diversity of cash flow and you're not tied to one asset in one zone. So as you meet with companies today, I want you to think about, in addition to the guy that you're talking to, which is important, and the asset and the financing and all these things that matter, I want you to think, where is this place? What zone is it going to be in? And once that zone is defined, am I comfortable having just one asset in one zone? Thanks for having me, and I'll see you all around the conference the next 2 days. Thanks. Yeah.
We are running a bit late, but if somebody's got one burning question after a fascinating zonal speech here by EB, one question before we move on to the next speaker? You've solved everybody's problems. Well done, thank you very much. Okay, let's move straight on to the next speaker, who is Gerard Reed, a co-founder of Alexa Capital.
I'm on the way.
Here he comes.
Hi. Great, thanks. Great to be here. So, thanks for having me. I'm really a technology investment banker, and I've spent the last 15 years in between on the research side and also on the asset management side, but really around technology. And what I'm going to do today is talk a little bit about what I see in the transport area and what I see in the energy area and what it means for you. Please just excuse the fact that I'm not a mining expert, but I think, have a good idea in terms of what's happening in the end products, which at the end of the day is incredibly important for what you're doing. What I would say by starting off is, it's going to be complex. The next 10 years are going to be complex. And you really have to be very, very careful with your money and what you're going to do with it, because the world is not just from an economic point of view changing, it's also from a technological point of view changing as well. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So if we went back to the Industrial Revolution, what we realized, the Industrial Revolution is about two things. It's about energy and it's about transport. That's what kicked it off. And the Industrial Revolution just happened to kick off in Germany, the UK, and then it went into the US. And what actually, if you look at how we separated ourselves from, in particular, China, it was because of these two technologies, right? And these two technologies allowed us really to have a massive increase in GDP over this period of time. Then we came to the beginning of the 20th century, and we had another one. We had oil, and we had transport. Again, this is led by Germany, this is led by the UK, this is led by the US, and another massive boom in GDP. And actually, if you look today, you can see that a lot of the businesses that were founded at that period of time are still dominating today. So the remnants of Standard Oil are still the big oil companies in the world. If I look at Bosch, Siemens, GE, they're all founded at this period of time, right? And again, you see nothing happen in the rest of the world. Now, if you look at where we're at now, I'd say there's two things, and I'm going to talk about these two topics. One is, I believe we're at the beginning of another industrial revolution. And there's two things I'll describe as one is the renewabilization of energy, and the second is the electrification of transport. And if you just give you an idea, this is 15% of global GDP at present. And the question is, who's going to win on this going forward? If I was to put my money on it, it's going to be China. Okay? It's not going to be the US, it's not going to be Europe. And the reason is because they understand this revolution and they understand the opportunity that it brings. So let me just talk about renewabilization of energy. What does this mean? Be clear. I don't need oil anymore. I don't need gas. I need electricity. None of our digital devices can actually function without it. You can't buy anything in a shop without it. You can't actually take money out of a bank without it. I mean, this is a massive change that we've seen in the last 20 years. We're totally dependent on this one energy source, which is electricity. And there's lots of different ways to produce that electricity, but we need electricity. We don't need oil and gas, right? The second thing I would say is, if you ask yourself, well, why do I think, we look at our device and we say it's all great. I actually will say to you that we will electrify heat and electricity. And we'll do so because of physics and economics. Physics is very simple, which is that electricity is much more economic, much more efficient than burning anything, right? So if you take an internal combustion engine, electricity in that car 3 times, 4 times more efficient than burning something in that car. Same thing in heating, right? If you're going to really do efficient heating, guess what? You're going to do heat pumps and stuff like this. And I say economics is because economics also is the other driver. For me, it's very rational. If physics wins, physics decides what happens long term, economics follows, right? And we're seeing that. The other thing, I just want to give you a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about in renewables. I've been in this area for quite a while. Is this just gives you an idea of fossil fuel generation that have been added every year. And this is basically coal and oil and gas. And then what you see is a massive increase in mainly wind and solar. But this year is a very interesting year because solar as a technology will be equal to, in terms of annual installations, of all other power generation technologies put together. Right? Just realize that, all put together. So there's something changing in our world. And as I said, renewabilization of energy. I first looked at a solar company in 2004. In 2004, the global market for solar was about 300 megawatts. This year, it's probably about 110 gigawatts, right? That's 110,000 megawatts. That's where we've gone to. We've never seen a technology in the energy space come to market as quickly as this. Never, right? If you think back in the oil industry, 1860, we're taking it out of the ground. Really, it took 50 years for oil to actually have a big impact on the energy space, right? The next thing I talk about is the electrification of transport. It's not just about electrification of transport. It's also the Uberization of transport. It's transport becoming a service. I heard a statistic the other day in Germany. There are 20,000 commercial drones at work in Germany today. There are 100,000 drones in total in the country, right? This is a completely different way of doing it. If I look at electric scooters, just give you an idea of electric scooters, they're being produced at millions per week at present, right? Transport is going through quite a change. The other thing is back to economics and to physics. Internal combustion engine, efficiency of it really hasn't improved in 100 years. I can hybridize it, which is what Toyota does, and they put a little bit of an electric engine in beside it and you can improve the efficiency. Or you can go and do that, which is you go fully electric, 77%. I want to say about the 70%, it's very interesting, is that Tesla made one very simple addition to their car, the Model 3, which brought that efficiency from 77% up to 82%. And this is only one innovation in the power electronics space. So they did, in 2 years, what the automobile industry did in 100. Just realize this. Right? This is, again, as I said, technology. If I was to look at costs, I took the US state of Minnesota against Germany. You can see economics of it makes sense now, but in particular, it makes sense if you are a commercial user, right? That's why you do it. So let me just describe a little bit of what is driving this revolution, because this is very important, because if you're going to make investment decisions, you need to really get a handle around what's changing. And because if you get a handle of that, you get a handle around how fast it changes. So let me start firstly with digitalization. So the next step in digitalization is artificial intelligence. Both of us hear this, but we've no idea what it is. I just want to give a very simple example of this. This is Google's business app, AlphaZero. Normally what happens is if you play chess and you play against a computer, what happens is the computer just goes through every single permutation, tens of millions of them, and then comes up with a decision. What AlphaZero did was they said, actually, we'll learn from mistakes and from what others have done. And they don't go to 10 millions of moves. They actually manage to go to tens of thousands of moves. This means they're much faster. And very interesting is this is the way the human being works as well. We don't need to go through all the permutations. We sort of skip steps and come up with this. And those of you who play chess, you realize the madness of AlphaZero, and I looked at it firstly. What this game continues to do is put the king in the middle of the board. And any of you who learn chess will say, you can't put the king in the middle of the board. But this is what this game is doing. And so you have chess masters looking at AlphaZero saying, we've never seen methods like this. We've never seen strategies like what this game is doing. So we now have chess masters learning from this game. That's artificial intelligence. So where is it coming? The first use of it is without a doubt in cars and vehicles, right? And yes, it might be a while, it might be 10, 15 years away before we have it fully in our cars, but you're going to have it in our ports very, very quickly. You're going to have it with cargo movements, et cetera, et cetera. It's all there. Why? Economics. It's economics is why it's going to be. Get rid of the driver and you reduce the cost of transport, okay? Pretty simple. And this is in Beijing. This is the longest traffic jam in history. It lasted 6 days. Okay. I mean, really, does anybody want that? No, they don't, okay? You want to be sitting in a car, if it's a car, and doing something else with it. The other thing I want to give you an idea of is digitalization. We're talking about 5G, ramp up of technology and whatever. If I look today worldwide, we use about 2.5% of electricity demand goes into IT, right? Most of it mobile phones. I come from Ireland, Dublin, just give you an idea of the scale of what Ireland is doing. Is that in the last 5 years, electricity demand in Dublin has doubled, and it's all because of data centers, right? This is Facebook, Google, Amazon, and so on. But if you look at this graph here, and this is not from me, this is from Nature, what you realize is, yeah, data centers will grow, but actually, the real thing that's going to happen is the internetization of things. Everything's going to be connected together. That's the world we're going into. That's why we're arguing with the United States and China about 5G, because it's the same thing. It's power. We need much, much, much more power going forward, right? The other thing I would just say to you is environment. I took this statistic from the United Nations, which is that just every year, a country, an area the size of Poland is swallowed by deserts, right? And we could go into climate change and this, that, and the other. I'm not going to go into it, but the bottom line is we're having an impact on our environment, and the result of it is policymakers are making regulatory changes. This just gives you an idea of sort of targets in China, Germany, Sweden for renewables, right? But again, it's not just renewables. It's plastics, it's food, it's water. We all have a sort of we have to change something. The other thing is a change in generation. I see this in my own daughter. First word beyond mama and papa was iPad. Okay, you might laugh and say, oh my God, but she learns completely different than I do. She uses the iPad to learn all the time. She watches YouTube videos. I mean, this is very different. If I look at the generation that I am, and I look at this generation Z, they're pretty different. I mean, I had my daughter say to me, why do I fly so much? It's bad for the climate. She's 8 years of age. Okay, I didn't have anything like that in my head at 8 years of age. But we have a generation change, and this, call it technology. They have access to information that we don't have. The second thing is we're moving towards pay-as-you-go. I think we realize that ourselves. You don't own things anymore. Everything we're doing is pay-as-you-go. Why? It's cheaper, okay? And it's more comfortable to use and so on. And that's very, very important going forward. I don't need to own things. I can just use them as I need them. Other thing I would say is consumers are becoming environmentally aware, right? This is our kids. This is our kids coming up and saying, we need to do something about this. It's affecting purchasing decisions, their purchasing decisions, our purchasing decisions. All right. Is it stopped? Oh, yeah, sorry. Let me go back. So the other thing I would say is competition. Competition's great, because what competition does is it drives innovation, drives down price. But we have to realize that probably the main reason we have inflation in the last 15 years is because of China. Keep driving down prices. They're now going into technology, and where 10 years ago I couldn't name a Chinese company, now there's a whole pile of these brands across the world. I give one example of just to give you an idea of how far China is ahead. 99% of electric buses in the world are Chinese made. You cannot buy a bus from the big, bus manufacturers in the Western world. You cannot. Go to Daimler and they'll say, oh yeah, we'll deliver it in 2 years' time, okay? Go to BYD and they'll deliver it now. And all the buses in London will be Chinese, right? In some form or other, they will be Chinese. I also want to say is that I think what China's achieved is pretty amazing. You probably see this from a mining space, but you don't really think about what they've done. What they've done on the electricity generation space is they have created the United States in a decade. Right? They have added the power generation capacity of the United States in a decade. So the United States takes 100 years, they do it in 10. Right? That's why we've got this, boom in commodities. What I also want to say as well is talking about economics, is this is where we go, which is cost parity. It's already cheaper to run an electric car, but when it's cheaper to buy the electric car, you can see what happens. Then you suddenly reach a tipping point that moves very quickly. Economics is also driving us to transport as a service. And remember, if you go autonomous, driver's gone, and guess what? None of us is going to own a car. Why would I own a car? It's a waste of money, right? You might think of it as a status symbol. Next generation does not think it as a status symbol. They just want to get from A to B. Other thing then is just give you an idea of improvements in costs. This just gives you an idea of the solar costs. You've seen massive decreases in prices over the last years, the same in onshore wind, and there's further to come. There's particularly on the solar side, you probably see another 50% reduction in costs over the next 5 years, right? The other thing then is economics. If solar is so cheap, remember, most of our chemicals comes today from gas, right? If I create ammonia or something like that, it comes from gas. If solar becomes so cheap, guess what happens? Then suddenly you change the chemical industry as well. You might say that might not happen, but I just make a point that energy really drives everything. So what does this mean? Complexity. That's what it means for you guys, and I'll explain exactly what that is. Let's talk about the move to EVs. Great news for commodity guys is they're heavier. That means there's more commodities, whatever it is, there's different forms of metals in them, right? And that's great. But what I would say is there's also a move to new materials, in particular carbon fiber. The BMW i3 is carbon fiber hull, right? Just first mass production carbon fiber car. Lots of aluminium in it because you need to get it light. Other thing is, quarter of this 400 kilogram gain is copper. And depending whether you use permanent magnets or not, it can actually be higher than that, right? Just realize a quarter of it's copper. And what I think a normal car has probably about 20 kilograms of copper, so you're going to 100 kilograms of copper. Second thing is, you're going to see reduction in certain materials, starting with steel. And steel is very simple. The engine block goes, exhaust, fuel tank, gearbox. They're just lumps of steel, right? 120 kilograms gone from it. Platinum, palladium, I don't need these materials anymore. I don't need to clean up the diesel or the gasoline anymore. Growth in batteries. Well, lithium is the long-term winner, and this is very important to understand this. The reason is this material, this metal, is very light. That's really, really, really important. Because if it's heavier, that means, right, you've got energy density problems and stuff like this. And you see any of the next generation lithium technologies, lithium polymer, they're all using lithium. So I cannot see lithium actually being replaced in the next sort of 20 years as a material. So that's number one. Number two, I just want to give you an idea of the wind space. This is Vestas 164 turbine. It's 105 meters up to the rotor there. If you think the diameter of the blades is about 180 meters, and it's 1,300 tons of weight. If you have it in concrete or foundation, the foundations are sometimes 1,500 tons of weight. Okay, 10,000 turbines sold a year. So to just give you an idea, you know, how much steel, concrete, carbon fiber, copper, and rare earths that go into this. I'll come back to rare earths in a second. Solar is also very interesting, but solar is pretty simple, because solar is basically glass. It's glass and silicon, so it's sand. All of it comes from sand, really, at the end of the day. But I want to give you an idea of the numbers of this that are sold. 500 million solar panels are sold per year. Just the number, just listen to the number. And you understand why mass production of that versus mass production of cars or mass production of something else, why they can get the cost down. Solar panel, 20 kilogram, guess what? It's very clearly the biggest industrial use for silver. Very clear, and there's no real alternative to it. I also do important to say is, but be clear in all of this that there are alternatives. So this is cobalt, and cobalt obviously is very important in batteries today because safety. It just really prevents fire. That's what it does, right? But you can decrease the levels of it going forward, right? And this is what you're seeing. NMC 111, you can see how much cobalt was in it. 50 kilowatt hour battery. 811 is where we're at now. You can see 4. So we can decrease the amount of it going forward. And also, by the way, there are also alternatives to it as well. The second thing is rare earth metals. I want to just show you this. If this is an Enercon turbine, this is a Vestas. This Enercon turbine has no rare earth metals in it. It's a direct drive, no rare earth metals in it. It's big, it's basically ball of copper. That's what it is. By the way, BMW electric cars, also the same, no rare earth metals in them. Vestas, Siemens, all the other turbine manufacturers, they actually use rare earth metals in their direct drives, right? So again, I just want to make a point that there are alternatives. Finally, I want to say that, you know, that in revolutions, strange things happen. This is, I think they're from MIT. Their view is that what happens is you go autonomous with the car, then what happens is you don't need the car anymore. It's not a status symbol. It's cheaper to go and just rent the car. And their view is that demand for cars will collapse. And if demand for cars collapse, then guess what happens? Then you obviously have an impact then on the materials that go into the cars. So what does this mean really? And I left this till the end, is that if you look at the fossil fuels, what's for me very, very clear is if I look at the fossil fuels is that coal in the Western world, we have seen peak demand in the Western world. We're not far off seeing peak demand in the Eastern world as well, in Asia as well. Oil, if I was to put my money on it, I'd probably say we're probably 7 years away from peak oil demand. Right? Just realize that phrase, forget about supply, there's loads of it out there. And the reason is, one, it's electrification, but the second thing is, and I do believe this, that what happens is you will buy less cars, right? So what does this mean? What this all means is that it's pretty difficult space for you guys going forward. But I just want to make the point as well at the end is that it really is an exciting time for all of us. And it's an enormous opportunity because, as I said, we've got close to 15% of the world's GDP up for grabs over the next 10 years. At that point, I'll stop.
Okay, thanks, Gerard. Appreciate as a question. If you want to ask questions, please ask them later, but we're trying to keep up with time. But we've obviously now had a really good macro view from EB. We've had a sort of EV view from Gerard, and now we're going to move on to Angelos Damascos from Sector Investment Manager, who's going to tell us about precious metals. Welcome, Angelos.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I run Sector Investment Managers, and among our investment products, we also manage a junior gold fund, which, as the name suggests, invests in junior gold and silver mining companies around the world. And the main approach is to invest in companies that have identified resources, because we believe in the value of resources in the ground in safe political territories. That is, we don't want to worry about someone directly or indirectly taking away our resources. So you can safely assume that I'm a believer in the value of gold and silver as stores of value and safe havens going forward. I'd like to concentrate on the recent developments in those metals and what is the possible outlook that could sort of re-rate our investments. So I'd like to point out that at the moment, perception is what can distort value in the short term. And we have seen it in the equity markets with the technology sector at huge valuations. We see it in the bond markets, extremely volatile, subject to the Fed and other central bankers' interest rate decisions. And gold has been subject to this lack of perception of value in recent years. I'd like to just tell you a little story about perception. So there are three young ladies who go out for a friendly drink. One is a redhead, one is a brunette, and one is a blonde. So they go into a bar, and after a while, they start chatting to the barman, who notices that they are wearing very expensive jewelry. So he asks them their opinion about precious metals. So the redhead says, "Oh, I love my gold jewelry. It has gone up so much in value over years that I could probably buy a very nice car now with it." The brunette turns around and says, "My jewelry is made out of palladium. And did you know that palladium has gone up in value much more than platinum, of which is a very similar metal? And I could probably buy 2 cars with my jewelry." And then the blonde says, "Well, I don't care very much about gold, platinum, or palladium. I just have 2 silicone bags, and you should see the cars outside my drive." So a few risk warnings about what you're hearing. Now, gold has been considered a safe haven and store of value since antiquity, and it does provide an insurance against unexpected developments, and it has proven its worth in recent crises, for example, in 2000 with the dot-com crash, and in 2007, 8, 9, I would say, with the financial crisis. We live in a very uncertain world. We have geopolitical crises rising around the world. In the Middle East, for example, we have a conflict between the West and Russia, with Russia's boisterous attitude and territorial claims. There are conflicts between China and Japan over territory, conflicts between North and South Korea, to name a few. So we live in a very unpredictable geopolitical landscape. Furthermore, we have the macroeconomic risks. Global debt to GDP is now well in excess of 320%. Any corporate entity with debt over 320% of its production would be extremely worried of a decline in its markets and a squeeze in its operating margins. So we could have, we have the proponents of the modern monetary theory who argue that it's okay to have huge debt levels in the world today because government can print money and governments are in control. Therefore, we can run this strategy forever. And then we have the more conservative Keynesian economists who argue that the global economy is not different to any corporation, and therefore we should be acutely concerned about the levels of this debt and how this might be paid off, especially if the world goes into a recessionary phase. Now, there are plenty of predictors at the moment that suggest that the global economy is slowing down. We have the trade wars between the West and China, for example, that could provide a major break to economic growth and could trigger a recession. And any recession would particularly affect the high growth economies in the world. It could affect emerging markets. It could even affect China, who have both accumulated huge amounts of debt, more than double the level that they were at before the financial crisis in 2007. So gold could be a good thing to have in a portfolio to provide some stability and some store of value in case of uncertainty and volatility. If you look at who is buying or who has been buying gold in recent years, you will notice that it has been primarily central banks. For example, and this chart at the bottom shows the percentage of reserves in each country that is held in gold. you can see that Russia has massively shifted its reserves into gold, obviously following the sanctions and the conflict with the West, as they are trying to avoid any dollar influence to their economy. And they have shifted their reserves from 3.5% in 2008 to over 18.5% today. That's a massive shift in favor of gold. China has shifted its reserves from approximately 0.5% in 2008 to 2.5% now. And that's the latest reported figures that we are not sure capture the most accurate data. India, another example, has shifted its reserves from 3.8% to double that, 6.2%. Turkey, another, from 0% in gold in 2008 to nearly 14% now. So there has been a massive buying wave by central bankers into gold bullion. And what does this tell us? That these people are not short-term traders. They are not going to sell because gold goes to $2,000. They keep it because they want to secure their reserves against the instability of the global currency systems. So we have a very strong tailwind in favor of gold. And we see it in the price action recently. Now, this chart is slightly out of date, ladies and gentlemen, because I prepared it on the 14th of June as I was writing up my notes. And you are probably aware that in the last few days, gold has broken above the 1,400 per ounce level in US dollars, which has been a key resistance point for over 6 years now. We have traded in an upwards trend, hitting higher lows, but always meeting that resistance level of about 1350, 1360, and dropping back again. Now, today we are well above that. The obvious assumption to make here is that if financial investors who prefer ETF exposure, ETF backed by bullion, to reposition their portfolios into some sort of a safe haven mode, if they start increasing their allocation to gold via ETFs, there will be less gold bullion available to deliver to those ETFs to back their investment requests. So therefore, a move into gold could be disproportionate when the financial investors decide to increase their allocation into gold. And we have to bear in mind that global allocations into gold at the moment is less than 1%. Now, what about silver as a safe haven? Many regard silver as a proxy for gold, but in fact, silver has many important industrial applications. So there is a very strong physical demand from the industry driving the demand for silver. And we see it in photovoltaics, we see it in most technology applications, iPhones, smartphones, tablets, computers, etc. But it does respond, if history is any guide, in a much more volatile fashion to movements in gold. So for example, you see in the aftermath of the financial crisis, silver initially lagged gold for a couple of years until some kind of a surge in demand by ETF buyers pushed its price very rapidly in a hockey stick style up to $50 an ounce. And since then, of course, gold started dropping after 2011 because investors became very comfortable with the idea of monetary easing and the global liquidity rise and the rise of the stock markets. So they abandoned the idea of holding gold in their portfolios. And silver, you can see, crashed much more disproportionately to gold, much more volatile. And it has since failed to keep up track with gold. Now, if we believe that we are now entering a new bull run for gold, well, its price is going to rise significantly higher, at some point silver is likely to catch up, and it will catch up with a vengeance. It will catch up much more quickly than gold. And at that stage, it might be worthwhile owning some silver in the ground. We spoke about platinum and palladium briefly in our story earlier. Palladium has been used as a substitute for platinum in catalytic converters recently, but most importantly, has been incorporated into many applications in electronic devices, and hence the demand for it has boomed in recent years. And you can see how it has massively outperformed platinum over the last 10 years or so. The problem with palladium is obviously that its supply is concentrated in less stable territories, if I should say, of South Africa and Russia. So effectively, it does make it a scarce commodity, and perhaps that is another factor that drives its price. So in short, if we think about the outlook for precious metals, what might be the winners and losers? We are in a very muddy macroeconomic picture. We cannot really see if there is a recession ahead of us, what are the forces driving such a recession, whether it's going to be the trade wars, whether it's going to be the debt levels, etc. However, gold is likely to remain a main safe haven for portfolio allocations for investors. So we believe that it's probably it has a fairly good outlook for a rising trend, particularly if we have any sort of financial crisis. Silver will respond to the gold bull market with a much more volatile fashion. So one has to be prepared to have extreme volatility in the market and the underlying equities. Ultimately, as I said, central banks have been storing away gold bullion, therefore there is less available to supply into a rise in demand for ETFs that need to back their assets with gold bullion. Palladium may remain strong because of its industrial applications, but it does feel a little bit overbought at this level. And platinum finally could be a cheap play and could stage a catch-up rally with the other precious metals. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to wish you happy investing. Thank you.
Okay, big tick in the box for Angelos there. He's caught us up 2 minutes. So we've had 3 really good macro sort of presentations. We now move on to 4 specific company presentations. And I'd like to start off, please, with Archie Komsadis, the CEO of Cardinal Resources.
Thank you very much. And what a great speech by Angelos, giving us some foresight into the gold price. Good morning, London. How are you all? I'm very glad to be here at around $1,400 gold, providing an update to the audience. Just to remind you all, we're sitting with over 5 million ounces in a single pit in Ghana, West Africa, brand new discovery. Our capital structure, over on the left-hand side there, the coverage that we get globally at the moment, list of players there, and our shareholders are there as well. As you can see, we've got people from Goldfields all the way through to Swiss institutions invested in our company, and everyone in between. Our shareholders by geographic location has been growing over the last 6 to 9 months in North America. They've surpassed Australia. Part of the reason is being told from the North Americans is they've been trickling out of, let's say, momentum plays that have been going on over there, and taking some money off the table and coming back to some real investments. The board of management, myself and Malik, founders, a little bit about us there. Our previous project is pouring gold in Ghana under the brand of Asenco. We sold that on in 2010 and kicked off the Cardinal project. I might add, we've been at this for over 20 years in this part of Ghana. Close to 25 years we made the initial discovery. We've brought on a COO by the name of Dave Anthony, who's in the audience today with us, and more than welcome to come and introduce yourselves at our booth. Dave's history is basically ex-Barrick guy. He's built half a dozen mines and been associated with them for Barrick, and all in all 10 plants in his lifetime he's taken from zero to production and been involved with them. Kevin Tomlinson, who's also in the audience with us, London-based, our non-exec chairman, banker, he's also here with us, so you're more than welcome to come and have a chat with Kevin as well. We've got Ken Thomas, who's on our board. Ken was number 3 employee for Barrick. He, Peter Monk and a few other technical guys kicked Barrick off, and he was a valuable contributor into some of the technical aspects of the company, which brought them up to where they are, or where they were recently. Michele Maskillo, he's our corporate lawyer out of Australia. He's been in this space, this is what he does. And Trevor Schultz, who's also a non-exec director, he's the former AngloGold COO. He built 4 mines for AngloGold back in the day through West Africa. And his latest gig was building the Centamin plant out at Egypt. He took that from 0 to 12 million tonne per annum. And he's had roles with BHP and Rio in the past. So as you can see there, we've got a couple of guys on the board who had history in building plants, successful history I might add, and the new addition, Dave Anthony, who could do this, as to quote Dave, with one arm tied behind his back. Ghana. We're in the northern part of Ghana. As you can see, Ghana has quite a few mines in the southern part of Ghana. Over 100 years of history of mining in Ghana, and we're the first commercial mine to come online in the northern part of Ghana. Hence, we enjoy quite a bit of support from the locals all the way through to the president, because there is a big interest in getting into production and becoming a large economic driver for the region. More importantly, I'd like to let you know that the infrastructure, it's all close by. We've got hydropower close by, continuous water supply all year round, and a sealed national highway that runs through into West Africa. That's the main haul road which feeds all the mines in West Africa. And we've got a mining lease which has been granted for 15 years. Off the back of our PFS, which was published in September of last year, at the time we had 4.76 million ounce reserve. We've since upgraded that, as I mentioned earlier, to 5.1 million ounces. The study consultants are on the left-hand side there, the usual suspects, tier 1 groups, Golder, Lycopodium, Knight, Peasold, ALS and the like. The numbers, basically at the time, we designed the pit around $1,100 gold price, and our financial model was $1,250, and the development cost was slightly over $400 million US. Our all-in sustaining costs have been broken up into 2 components, because we've got a shallow million ounces from the surface that we consider to be the payback or the starter pit. That'll operate, it'll cost around $600, but for the life of mine we anticipate around $750 to $800 is where we'll land for the life of mine. And the project payback period is less than 2 years if it was 100% debt. And post-tax NPV is there and IRR is there. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. You make of it what you will with those numbers there. A little bit more detail on this page. Basically, the starter pit numbers, we should produce around 360,000 ounces according to this study. Also, the total amount of gold we'll produce in a 2.5-year period is around 900,000 ounces. There's your head grade, the recoveries, and the strip ratio of 0.5 to 1 for the starter pit. And for the life of mine scenario, we should be around 300,000 ounces per annum, and with a strip ratio on this study of about 1.4 to 1 for 14 years. Sensitivities. I've said this before, so it's not anything new. We always plan for the downside for about $1,000 gold price, and the sensitivity, the IRR still hangs in over 20% at around $1,000 gold. And we'd always prayed for the $1,350 to come along. Well, here we are today at $1,400. So bright future for everybody in this space, not just Cardinal. And let's just hope it hangs on. A little bit about the project. They're the broad dimensions of the pit as it stands. It's approximately 1 kilometre long by 400 metres deep. What's interesting is the next slide. It shows the width of the deposit of the ore. It's about 350 metres wide. Now, why that's important is the strip ratio. As you can see there, over to the west, where there's a bit of waste there, most of it is free dig. We're in the ore, we're digging, that's why our strip ratio is so low, and it helps our project economics. 350 metres wide. What we've also been able to establish is the geology doesn't break beneath the pit. That hole there to the west gives us data down to about 650 metres. So with these kind of prices of gold, it may be worth looking beneath the pit for any underground potential. But it looks like it doesn't break. So we're going to sink a few more holes in there by the end of this year and have a look at what's going on beneath the pit. Our flow sheet, standard conventional equipment, off the shelf. There's nothing special in this other than the blue circle there. A few weeks ago we published a press release stating that we were going to investigate that Arken technology. And for those of you who haven't read the press release, I'll just give you a minute on it. This technology is very simple. It's been in mines for the last 10 years. 6 investors in the mining industry got together and kicked this thing along, funded it in the early days, and it's public knowledge. We published it as well. Randgold was one of the largest supporters. Mark Bristow and co were one of the largest supporters of this technology, and he runs it in all of the Randgold mines, and he's planning to roll it out into the Barrick mines, and the list goes on and on. But basically it's just a pre-scrubber, scourer, oxidization before of the pyrite before it drops into the leach tanks. It basically cleans and prepares and oxidizes the pyrite before it goes into the leach circuit, and the benefit of that is twofold. Greater recoveries is one component of it, but more importantly, we can coarsen up the grind size because it doesn't discriminate between ultra-fine and fine. It just does its job. And in doing so, we save a lot of power, chemicals, reagents, residence time, and it's the OPEX savings that we're looking for to further enhance the project. Sure, getting a few extra ounces of gold at the end of the year isn't a bad thing either, but the savings on OPEX across the entire production profile is what we're chasing, and we feel that it's material enough to factor into our feasibility study, which is due in Q3. Little bit more about our district play, our land package. Namdini's there in the bottom right-hand corner. We've got another 900 square kilometres of prospective ground. We know that not all of it's going to be prospective. We've identified some areas that aren't mineralised, but by far and large, most of it are, and we're going to ramp up our exploration for the second half of this year a little bit more, because we've been able to identify a few areas, and it's been in the public domain. We've got a particular area there called Ndongo East that has very shallow, high grade, down to 50 metres, high grade satellite type pit that can be developed there, and a few other locations, because what we want to do is haul this ore into the production facility and grow from 14, 15 years of production to possibly 20 or 30 years as time goes by, so we can keep the mill busy for quite a long time beyond Namdini. Here are our timelines. As I mentioned earlier, Q3, our feasibility study. Hopefully our decision to mine later this year, and all in all, pouring gold in the second half of 2022. All things being equal, money matters. So it's about getting the financing sorted out this year. District exploration will be running in the background, as I said earlier, trying to identify higher grade, longer life feed to complement the already great Namdini that we have on our hands. Short and sweet, I'd like to thank everybody, and I wish everybody happy investigating in this conference. You'll enjoy it, and all the best. Thank you, London.
Thank you, Archie. Another tick in the box for keeping that one within time. What I'd like to do now is welcome on stage Dan Simmons, the Vice President Investor Relations of Argonaut Gold.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Mining Journal for having me here today to deliver the Argonaut Gold story. For those of you who don't know Argonaut, we're a producing company with 3 operating mines and 3 development projects. Given the limited time, I'm going to move through pretty quick, and I was probably aggressive, but I booked a meeting with myself upstairs in 10 minutes, so I'm going to try and get us back on time. Argonaut Gold, I consider us the safe gold leverage play. And when I say the safe gold leverage play, is because our leverage comes through operational leverage and leverage from ounces that we have in the ground through our existing mineral reserves that are not yet in production. 60% of our reserves are not yet in production through those 3 development projects. We're not levered through financial means. We keep a very strong balance sheet. And I think when we look at the history of the company, we were founded in 2010, and the goal of the company was to become a 300,000 to 500,000 ounce producer. I can say today, this year we're going to do over 200,000 ounces. We're 2/3 of the way there, and we've taken the slow and steady approach to doing so. We've delivered over 1 million ounces of production since we founded the company in 2010. And the reason we want to get to this 300,000 to 500,000 ounce level is we feel much beyond that the treadmill starts getting too fast, and it's hard to replace your production level. And at that level, when we looked at this business, when the company was founded, we looked at if we have $1,200 gold and we can keep our all-in sustaining costs at $950 or less, we're going to generate significant free cash flow where then we can fund our exploration programs to replace our reserves. We can build cash on the balance sheet to be able to build our new mines that are coming on to replace production as mines close in the future. And we'll have enough cash left over to start returning capital to shareholders. That's the goal of the company, and as I said, we're 2/3 on our way. And if you just look at the last 3 years here, we've quietly, during a down market, been able to grow our production base 65%. And I think what's really interesting about this, it is the slower and steadier way to get there, but we've done it with a clean balance sheet. We have 14 million net cash, 28 million cash in the balance sheet, only 14 million drawn on our revolver, and only 178 million shares outstanding. This company was founded in 2010. We have never, in the history of the company, issued a common share that wasn't used for M&A purposes. So we're not a company that comes back and has our hand out to the market. When we build a mine, we build up cash on our balance sheet through operations, and then we take on a reasonable amount of financial leverage, as we drew on our revolver here to build our last mine, and then we do it through cash in the balance sheet. So it's the old-fashioned way. We're running a real business here, and I'm excited about where we're going. Our producing assets, you can see here the red dots, we're producing all 3 mines in Mexico. Our El Castillo complex is 2 mines. They're about 10 kilometers apart, our El Castillo mine and our San Agustin mine, as well as our La Colorada mine up in Sonora. 2 other development projects in Mexico, San Antonio, which sits in the Baja California Sur, and our Cerro del Gallo project, and I'll get into these assets a little bit later. And then, of course, our Magino asset up in Canada, which is we view as a very strategic asset, all resource categories, over 5 million ounces in that deposit. When we look at the production here at the El Castillo complex, We have a history here. We've produced about just over 750,000 ounces through the complex to date. We're going to do 140 to 150,000 ounces at this complex this year. One of the big things going on at our San Agustin mine this year is we're making a $15 million investment to increase the crushing throughput rate from 20,000 to 30,000 tons per day. So at that mine, we're increasing production 50%. That'll be in place here in the second half of this year. La Colorada, this year we'll do 60 to 65,000 ounces. So consolidated over 200,000 ounces of production, which, as I'll speak to in a few moments, really I think puts us in the next category in terms of valuation. Right now, I don't believe that we're getting much, if any, value in our share price today for our development asset portfolio. All three assets, I think, are strategic in nature, and none more so than our Magino mine, past producing mine up in Canada. This project sits right next to Alamos's Island Gold Mine, formerly owned by Richemont Gold. You can see the blue line there separating the property. We have a feasibility study done on this project, 17-year mine life, 20% after-tax rate of return at $1,250 gold, $290 million NPV, at 5% discount. If you plug in $1,400 gold where we're sitting today, that NPV jumps up over $430 million. On this project at Magino, we've just received in the first quarter of this year both the federal and provincial environmental permitting. So that really opens the floodgates to all your construction permits and things you need there. The capital for this project is a little bit beyond our reach ourselves, or what we would do ourselves is $320 million. So for us, we'll entertain the ideas of partnerships, and internally, let's get this project warm and ready to go, and we'll see where the market is when we're there. For our other development assets, Cerro del Gallo, this is an interesting asset. It's right down the middle of the fairway of what we've done well. Argonaut, we operate heap leach projects in Mexico. Cerro del Gallo is another one of these projects. We picked this project up at the end of 2017 for $15 million cash. It was a distressed situation. The previous company who had this had different market environment at the time, but when they had acquired this asset back in 2012, they had acquired it for $120 million value in shares, and they'd put $30 million into the ground, developing this project, tying up all the land, all the water, exploration drilling, as well as a feasibility study. So their numbers and not ours. We're coming out with our own preliminary feasibility study later this year, but their numbers, they saw a project that was about $150 million capital, cash cost just over $500 per ounce, with after-tax NPV 6% discount at $180 million. So what I like about this project, it's right down the middle of the fairway of what we've done well. It's in Mexico. It's a heap leach project. It's a project that we were able to come into for only $15 million. And in a very short time, in less than 2 years, we'll be able to deliver our own economics on this project and let the world know how we view it. Our San Antonio project, this is by far the best asset in our portfolio from a rate of return perspective, over 60%, only $85 million in capital for $200 million NPV, 15-year mine. The issue we've had with this project is where it's located in the Baja California Sur. It's not a prevalent mining area. We've been working on permitting on this one for quite some time. We, in the past, had a zoning issue that now has been taken care of, and the whole project is now zoned for mining. We refiled our environmental permits applications here in February of this year, and we should have some results on that by the end of this year. And when I look at the potential re-rate potential for this stock, I look at the two clusters here that we see. We were producing in this 100 to 150,000 ounce range for quite some time. We built our San Agustin mine in 2017. We're continuing to ramp that up with an expansion this year from 20,000 to 30,000 ton per day. As that moves forward, and we can show this year that we deliver over 200,000 ounces of production, we're confident that we should see a re-rate. If you look at enterprise values of companies along this graph based on production rating. So what we see is right now we're still being valued as a smaller producer, but as we continue to deliver that, Q4 last year was our first quarter over 50,000 ounces of production. Again, Q1, 54,000 ounces of production. So I think if we can deliver a few more quarters here, we'll see that through. The other catalyst with Magino, as I said, we received the environmental permits this year. So we're continuing the permitting on that project, and we'll explore potential partnerships to see what the best way is to move that project forward. Cerro de Gallo, we've submitted our permits on that project, and we should have a pre-feasibility coming out here before the end of the year. And San Antonio, again, we should have an answer on where we stand with our environmental permitting by the end of the year as well. So our focus this year is really simple. We plan to build the balance sheet. We added $11.7 million in free cash to the balance sheet in the first quarter. Continue to de-risk the development projects, which I would argue there's no value for today in the stock, as well as deliver our first year and a record year of over 200,000 ounces of production. And just because I've gone through that really quick, I will just point out one more slide. If you look at the analyst consensus and the value for our assets, and then the value we're receiving in the market today, we're receiving today, if I was up this was done a couple weeks ago, but I was updated, we're receiving about $250 million of value today in the market. If you look at only our operating assets and our net cash position, that's $300 million of value. So we have a $50 million value that we should be able to close here just by executing, as well as if you look at these development assets where the consensus are versus where the technical reports show, there's a lot of value we can add through as we continue to de-risk these assets and move them closer to production. So that was the quick version, and I have to run upstairs to a meeting. I'm going to be upstairs at stall number 4 today. I'd welcome anyone to stop by at any time, and I'd be happy to chat further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan, and we are now brilliantly back on time. So can I welcome up to the stage, please, Vincent Benoit, the CFO of Endeavour Mining.
Hello. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to Mining Journal to inviting Endeavour Mining to present, and I give you an overall view of our operations. Starting with a map to tell you where we operate. We operate here in West Africa, as you can see. We have 2 operating mines in Côte d'Ivoire, Agbaou and Ity. 2 operating mines in Burkina Faso, Houndé, which is one of our flagship, and Karma. And we have 1 project in Mali called Kalana that we bought from Avnel in 2017 and that we are developing and optimizing. So overall, this year we target to produce around 700,000 ounces at an all-in sustaining cost around $800 per ounce. We have 9 million ounces of reserve and 15 million ounces of M&I resource. So West Africa is clearly a focus for Endeavour Mining, and it's an area where we want to stay and where we want to develop our operation today. And let me tell you why we are so bullish about West Africa. We do believe that there is a strong potential in that area and that we have a competitive advantage. This area is the 4th largest gold producing region globally. It's the 3rd region which attracts global exploration budget, and is the first region where we have, over the past few years, discovered gold when we rank globally, worldwide, the world discoveries. Some numbers around that. First, in production, you see that West Africa is producing 8 million ounces in 16, which is the first producer. It's better and beyond United States or Peru or even South Africa. Significant exploration efforts in West Africa, so it attracts more and more exploration because discoveries are there, because the potential is there. So when you consolidate the numbers which has been invested in exploration in Burkina, in Côte d'Ivoire, in Ghana, in Mali, and even in Senegal, you see that This region spent, we took the 17 years, in 17, 385 million, which is the third region after Canada and Australia where globally companies are investing in exploration. And the result is here, because when you look at the discoveries, 10 years discoveries between 2006 2016, you see that West Africa has discovered 80 million ounces in a decade. So it's the number one discovery region, so clearly strong potential. And we do believe it's not finished for, it's a reasoning, but for a simple reason is that when you look at the Greenbelt stone, which is across all the West Africa. You see Ghana, of course, is one of the regions where there is a lot of production discoveries in the past decades, in past centuries even. But it represents a very small portion of that belt, and that countries like Burkina Faso or Côte d'Ivoire total 60% of the belt, but only 25% of the production. So clearly there is an unbalance because probably those regions we haven't invested enough in exploration in those regions, and this is something that makes us believe that the potential is strong there. West Africa as well, in terms of political and overview on the economic union, is quite simple. All those countries are quite simple to operate. First, because they act like one economic zone, one economic area, with a central bank, BCAO, same currency, which is linked with euro, so not a lot of surprise on the currency front, and with fiscal but also accounting norms that are harmonized and normalized across the countries. So no needs to have complexity, and I would say, as a CFO, we are acting quite normally with the tax authorities, so there is no strange things happening there. So the tax system, all that is quite stable, even if sometimes, of course, it changes, and they might change the mining codes, but they do not come back on the contract and mining convention that has been settled years ago. So globally, a good area to operate. Endeavour is emerging as the only multi-asset West African and mid-tier producer. You see here, we compare the number of mines that we operate compared to the countries where we operate. So we operate 4 mines in West Africa in 2 countries. So geographically, we are very focused and diversify as well. Objective is also probably in the next few years to first open a new mine. You know that we were probably in Mali with a mine called Tabakoto that we sold last year, but we have this project Kalana that might be built probably in 1 or 18 months year time. But we are also expanding in the region, taking some permits in Guinea, but also in Niger, because also those countries have a part of the belt and are also, we do believe, underexplored. An overall view about our production and all-in sustaining cost. You see the story of Endeavour here since 13. So year after year, we are increasing our production and we are decreasing our all-in sustaining cost. So it's done mainly through internal growth, construction of project, but also sometimes external growth, as we did acquire Avnel or True Gold over the past 4 years. So you see that in 14 we built Agbaou. That makes a huge step for us. In 16 we acquired True Gold that started in April 16 with a full year in 17. In 17 we finished Houndé that started at the end of the year. So a full year in 18. So it explained the growth between 17 and 18. And in 19, we have finished ET-CIL. ET was a small mine. It was an in-pitch operation that we have upgraded to a CIL, a 4 million tons plant CIL, now probably even 5 million tons plant CIL, that as we are upgrading the plant currently. And so 19, since April, ET has started. So it's potential growth for 20. And we still have some growth as we are in green over there. You see intending to build Kalana probably in 21. During that period, you see that all-in sustaining costs that were in 13 at around $1,300 per ounce have decreased to this year to $800 per ounce. So we are building a premier African gold producer, and we have 4 strategic levers to achieve our global objective. Global objectives are to have mine life over 10 years, all-in sustaining cost below $800 per ton, and producing around 800,000 ounces. 4 strategic levers: operational excellence, project development, clearly internal growth is the focus, unlocking exploration value, and the management of our portfolio and balance sheet. So operational excellence first. One thing that we are very proud of is the safety record. You see here that operating track record on the LTI is decreasing year after year. From 16, where we were at 0.4, we are now at 0.16. And when we compare to the peer group average, which is 0.8, we think that we are in the benchmark. Construction track record as well is very important, because you know that during construction might happen some difficulties, and we have built Houndé, Agbaou, and Ity with no LTI. So 8 million man-hours with no LTI for Ity build. Operational excellence is also a model where we try to have hands-on management model with team close to the operations. So we have a team, the headquarters is here in London. We are listed in Toronto, but the headquarters is in London. Small team, we have a very small headquarters here. Most of the people are in Abidjan, about 40 people, operational headquarters is Abidjan, and they are able to fly very easy to all the mines and to reach the mines in 1 or 2 hours. So very efficient model, sharing expert in mining, in processing, they are able to reach the mine very quickly. So quite efficient model with a big part of the team based in Abidjan. Project development. So most recent mine build, you've seen that we have a strong track record in terms of building. We built Nzima in Ghana in 2010. We built Agbaou in 2014. We did Houndé in 2017, and finally Ity CIL this year. Every time on schedule, on budget, or even below budget, and with 0 LTI. When you can see here the asset and the fact that we are building high quality project. If I take Houndé first, which has now a bit more than a year of production, all-in sustaining cost of Houndé should be $650 per ounce. It's the objective and average over the first 2 years. For a production of 260,000 ounces, 10 years mine life, and build starts ahead of time and under budget. Same for Ity CIL, lower, much more profitable mine, as all-in sustaining cost is targeted to be below 600 for the first 2 years. Production 240, 14 years mine life, and Ity has started 2 months ahead of budget, on schedule, sorry. So overall, very good track record in terms of construction. If I focus just on the last project, Ity, you see here the mine plans of Ity. Ity is a very old mine that we have completely reshaped. Ity was, again, a heap leach operation that has operated since the late 90s, with no visibility and very little production, around between 50 and 60,000 ounces in heap leach production. When the new management team arrived in 2015 with Ity, we started with a project to build a plant of 1.5 million tons plant. Then we optimized to 2 million, then to 3, and finally we are building 4. And we have even taken the decision to upgrade the plant to 5 million tons that will be built at the end of the year, because we have done some discoveries around Ity that makes us believe that we have the means and we have the resource to feed the plant at a much higher pace. So Ity is a very profitable project. Again, 14 years mine life, after-tax return of 40%, NPV currently at 5% is over 700 million, and the payback is expected to be 2 years. Let me give you first a small movie. I hope it will be clear just about ET. Yeah, so this is quick movie just to see the site of ET, which is one. So we have a logistic. We are transporting people by planes. This is the TSF, which is now in operation. Power generator, we are connected to the grid, but we have a backup with some genset. A fleet of material, brand new fleet bought from Komatsu with a financing agreement over the next 5 years. Of course, operations have started, so mining have started there. You see, this movie was done in March, but it's the first try with the conveyor of ET, the crusher over there, and you see the build of the SAG and ball mill here, which is now, of course, running and finished. The tanks, the plant. This project has cost $415 million and is expected again to be paid back over the next 2 years, and is in operation since April 8th. One thing important as well is that we have always a ramp up for our mines between the moment we pour the first gold to the moment we declare commercial production, which is about a month. And after that, we reach nameplates and we never came back. Third layer of our strategy is unlock exploration value. So we have a huge plan for exploration, which aims to discover between 10 and 15 million ounces in 5 years, so between 16 and 21. You see here in gray what we have discovered compared to the objective in the different areas. So we are at the middle of our plan, and you see here that we have discovered about 3.5 million ounces. 4.5 million ounces, sorry. Last piece, portfolio and balance sheet management. Important to show you that we are constantly managing portfolio. We want our mines to be in what we call the magic quadrants, so over 10 years mine life and below $850 per ounce. So you see ETCL is clearly there, Houndé is there, and we will announce as well on Houndé some good news in the coming years, in the coming days with some reserve that will probably be qualified. Kalana, Agbaou and Karma for the moment are a bit out of this, but we've seen that all the mines that were not able to reach that quadrant have been sold. Tabakoto last year, Enzima and Anuga in 16. Conclusion, what do we offer? We offer clearly a pipe of projects that will transform into PFS and DFS, and there are still a lot of projects in the pipe, and of course, immediate, and we want all those projects or part of those projects to become mines. And finally, in terms of what we did, in fact, we are just entering in a new period now for Endeavour. Between 16 and 19, we invested $1 billion to build our mines. We have now 2 big flagships, which are ET and Houndé, with some projects in the pipeline. We have demonstrated the efficiency of our exploration upside and our exploration strategy. Now, what we want is to concentrate on cash flow return, reimbursement of our debt, and return on capital employed. We are currently at 8% of return on capital employed. We want to reach 20%, and this is clearly the objective over the next 2 years, is to reach the 20% and start to pay dividends or share buyback in the year to come. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Vincent. And now for our last presentation from a gold company before the break, can I welcome Justin Osborne on the stage? He's the Director of Exploration and Growth from Gold Road Resources.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about Gold Road today. We're We're a junior exploration company in Australia. We're on the verge of becoming a mid-tier gold producer. Get through that one. The major asset that we have is the Yamana Greenstone Belt, situated out here on